After the break is by Ms. Rebecca Corbett. She's from the University of Southern California, Japanese Studies librarian and director special projects. She has been attending our conference before, so she is a loyal member. I'm glad to see you again. So I give you the floor at once. As I said, the second presentation has been cancelled, so after Ms. Rebecca Corbett's presentation, we have the third and last one of this morning. Okay, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Great. Thank you very much for having me back at EAJRS. It's a pleasure to be here. And as the abstract explains, I'm introducing a digital project that we've tentatively titled Off the Beaten Path, Alternative Views of the 53 Tōkaidō Stations. So thinking about the theme of adapting to new trends, as a lot of us know, we've already worked on digital exhibitions, digital projects. It's becoming more and more common, and librarians in particular are often being asked or expected to work on these types of projects. And I'm presenting myself, but I'm presenting on behalf of a project team. And what we're really seeking to do is go beyond just providing access to digitized materials, which in our case are already available through our respective digital libraries, and looking to provide scholarly context and meaning around them, which we think is kind of more the future direction that we should be going in. And typically digital projects that we work on as librarians, at least speaking for myself and other project team members, have focused on resources just at our own institutions. In this project, we're collaborating across collections from 3 schools with small to mid-sized Japanese studies collections, bringing together materials, developing this hopefully dynamic interpretive lens around them. So putting materials in conversation with each other in the digital environment, something that we would be unlikely able to do in the physical environment, given that they're rare materials. Putting them in conversation with one another, hopefully they can be made more meaningful than if studied in isolation, particularly because we are these small to mid-sized collections. So there's, if a researcher comes to our institution, there may not be that many materials for them to look at in terms of thinking about Japanese rare books. We think maybe this can be a model for other institutions with similar sized collections, or just for topics more broadly where we have primary sources scattered across a continent like North America or Europe, or scattered around the globe. But of course, being a cross-institutional collaboration, there's a lot of challenges. We have different digitization capacities and timelines and requirements and policies within our institutions. And so we're working around these challenges, and we're looking to launch the site in coming months. I am not giving a confirmed date because we don't want to have to stick to one. But we would like to take the opportunity to discuss our work with other Japanese studies resource specialists. So thank you to the conference organizers, and hopefully get some feedback, suggestions, comments. So let me see, I'm not good at PCs. Let me try. And okay, I advanced a slide. So the project team includes myself, Dr. Anne-Marie Davis, who's also here in the room, and I might throw some questions to her if I can't answer them, who's from the Ohio State University, Dr. Jessie Dryan, who is formerly of USC working with me and is now across town at UCLA, another school in Los Angeles, and Dr. Matthew Hayes, who's at Duke University, and a couple of other contributors who have helped along the way, Eric Buckenmeyer and Curtis Fletcher, who's another colleague of mine at USC. So myself, Anne-Marie and Matthew, we all manage Japanese studies collections at our respective institutions, OSU, USC and Duke. And we also work with Japanese rare books, although these are typically held in special collections, different branch libraries than our East Asia libraries. And Jessie brings significant digital humanities expertise to our team, with Eric bringing, especially in the early stages, assisting with metadata. And then Dr. Curtis Fletcher is one of the PIs on Scalar, which is a web publishing platform. So the genesis of our work was actually a 53 stations story map that Anne-Marie developed at Ohio State during the pandemic using ArcGIS. And then that led to conversations between her and I about a possible digital collaboration where we could draw on some of the overlapping themes to leverage our respective collections in new ways. And then after a year of talking, but I have to admit not doing a lot, I think I can say, we brought Matthew and Jesse into the conversation. And so we really wanted to focus not on a digital exhibit, but making a pedagogical resource that's built around the items from each of our library collections. We chose to use Scalar as the platform because we have this support through USC, where that platform was built. We can, through that, leverage those networks. They have student workers, for example, who can create coding to suit our needs. So we can say, is this possible? And then they can make it possible. So as most of you no doubt know, the Tōkaidō was a roughly 500-kilometer overland route developed during the Edo period. And I'm going to go back, if I can, to my slides. It's a roughly 500-kilometer overland route developed during the Edo period that connected the city of Edo with modern-day Tokyo with Kyoto. The route comprised 53 post stations or rest stops, which served as both checkpoints for formally requesting passage and as hubs of commercial activity. And for centuries, the landmarks and terrain at these stations have captured the imagination of Japanese artists and travel writers. Perhaps most notable among them was the ukiyo-e artist Utagawa Hiroshige, whose Hōedo series, which was published between 1833 to 1834, a woodblock prints, stands out as the most well-known representation of the highway. So that's the Hōedo series of the Tōkaidō Goju-san-tsugi by Hiroshige. Hiroshige, along with other well-known artists such as Katsushika Hokusai, helped to really establish new genres of printed series of landscapes that depicted familiar perspectives enjoyed by travelers who frequented these 53 stations. So in this project, we're taking an alternative view and seeking to counterbalance an overwhelming focus on the now standard imagery of the Tōkaidō landscape through things like the Hiroshige's Hōedo series. So by the 18th century, the Tōkaidō, its 53 stations, had occupied a dominant and multifaceted position in the cultural and artistic imagination. But the canonical works of that first series by Hiroshige really only provide one perspective on the dynamic route and its post stations. And so while, of course, the role of Hiroshige and others remains crucial to our understanding of the cultural and historic importance of this overland route, the derivative or iterative depictions, as well as later additions by artists like Hiroshige himself, may offer entirely new and surprising inroads to social, cultural, and historical understandings of Japan as a country on the move. So toward this end, we venture off the beaten path in order to showcase artists, vantage points, and topographies that expand common perceptions of the landscape of the Tōkaidō, and also show how deeply ingrained it had become in popular culture by the late 18th century and into the early 19th century. In addition to providing alternative views of the 53 stations, we also seek to provide an alternative view or showcase rare library holdings at institutions that have these small to mid-size collections in Japanese studies. So like the works of Hiroshige, special collections holdings at the large and well-resourced institutions tend to more readily draw the attentions of researchers working in the contemporary period. And so as our project attempts to reveal, smaller institutions can also provide resources that are not only historically rich in their own right, but that may also effectively complement the uses of resources at the larger, more well-resourced institutions. So this project is therefore also an attempt to amplify the important role that mid-sized collections play in supporting and advancing scholarly discourse in Japanese studies. And then the scholarly training of each of us as project members who all hold PhDs in Japanese history, literature, or religion has been especially useful, we think, in the conceptualization of this project, which emphasizes not only the alternative views of the 53 stations, but also alternative views of what small to mid-sized collections can offer. And the respective skill sets of the various group members as both researchers and resource specialists has also allowed for what's a really highly curated approach to these academic themes. And as I've said, we're really aiming to produce not just a show and tell, but a really deeply curated set of resources that leverages the skill sets we have and the collections that we steward. And at a general level, we think this project is a proof of concept that highlights the collaborative potential in digital exhibitions. And so a major premise of our project is that in putting materials in conversation with one another, we not only heighten the visibility of our respective collections, but also bring a more dynamic interpretive lens to their shared histories and themes. So the items that, and here's some thumbnails of just some of the items. There are a few more that I can show as well. The items we're including in the project are those that we already had in our collections, and then a few that were purchased with this project in mind, and then actually additional materials we discovered in our collections while doing the project. So one example by Hiroshige is the Tōkaidō Goju Sansugi, but the Kyoka Tōkaidō edition, which is from around 1840, so a little bit later than the Hoedo. And it's woodblock printed, bound as an orihon accordion book. It's presumed to be a middle printing of this series, and so probably late 1840s. That's based on comparison with other digitized copies. And this is at USC libraries. And it's the Kyoka Tōkaidō because it has kyoka or satirical poems on every page. Then also at USC, we have Jippen to Iku's Tōkaidō Goju Sansugi Kokkei Hizakurige Zen, which is from 1886. And this is an album of copper plate printed scenes from what's known in English as the Shanks Mare, a novel by Jippen to Iku. And it's a presumed first edition of the first copper plate printed production. The colophon gives the date of registration as January 19th, Meiji 19, so 1886. And this is approximately 10 months prior to the release of the earliest edition held by the Diet Library. We also have Tōkaidō Goju Sansugi from the 1840s by Utagawa Kunimori. This is from Duke University. This is, again, woodblock prints circa 1840, so very similar time. It is also orihon. It has light green silk covers with gold geometric and flower patterns. And each print is mounted to a single side of the orihon. Also from Duke, we have a Tōkaidō Tuke no Zu, which is from 1720 to 1840. This one is landscape watercolor paintings of the Tōkaidō in the mid to late Edo period. It includes more than the traditional 53 stations. It actually has 69 in total, each on a single sheet, and they're also pasted onto one side of an accordion-bound book. From Ohio State, the Ohio State University, we have Tōkaidō Goju Sansugi Manga Emaki from approximately 1921. This is created by members of the Tokyo Manga Association, and there's actually a set of two hand scrolls at OSU that each have 55 watercolors. So that represents the 53 stations and then the starting and end points at Nihonbashi and Sanjo Ohashi, Tokyo and Kyoto. And then each station is represented differently across the two scrolls. And the scrolls were created following a trip that 18 members of the Manga Association took along the Tōkaidō in 1921. And then we also have, sorry, let me go back to, we have, mouse across. We have, sorry for the small thumbnails, we have 3 Sugoroku game boards from OSU as well that illustrate each of the 53 stations. So you can just get a rough picture from these. And these, 2 of them were printed in the late Edo period, 1850s, 1860s. They are designed by Utagawa Kunisada and Utagawa Yoshiharu. And then there's one from the 1920s which I believe is this one, which was published in Asahi Graph. Oh no, I've got them in the wrong order. You can ask Anne-Marie about those. So, we have materials ranging from mid to late Edo period through to about the 1920s. We have wood block printed, we have watercolors, we have copper plate printed, and different formats like scrolls, accordion bound books, and created, by different people for different reasons. And then the thematic questions that we've identified as important as we're discussing each item are the materiality and format. So how does the material or format of the item affect interactivity or consumption practices? How do those shape the perception of the Tōkaidō for the reader or viewer? Geography and space. So how are the locations differently arranged in each work? What can we conclude from these differences about the fluid perceptions of space and spatial histories? Visuality. So what range of landmarks are depicted at these sites and from which angles? What does the visual layout and emphasis on physical landmarks tell us about the narrative or artistic intention, or about the importance of direction and perspective in viewing Japan through these works? And circulation. What do any signs of ownership or circulation, stamps, seals, marginalia, tell us about the audience? And can we place these works in a specific place and time with regard to readership? So to give a few examples, the Kyoka Tōkaidō, where is the mouse gone? The Kyoka Tōkaidō, which is on the far, your left here, is at USC. It's actually bound in a reverse order than the standard 53 stations route. And then 2 stations are missing, Hara and Numazu. Probably these discrepancies result from the binding of what were individual prints into a book format. But what can this tell us about how the materiality or the format, is affecting interactivity, like I said, and consumption practices? How does that shape the reader's perception of the Tōkaidō historically today? It's possible, I think through discussions I've had with a few people, that the accompanying kyoka or comic satirical poems printed on each image were composed by members of a poetry group. They might have had the series bound in book format to commemorate a particular event. The Duke, the Tōkaidō 53 stations at Duke seems to be put together more like a scrapbook and like evocative of postcards or a travel album. And I can give some more examples later as well. So, we're facing challenges like different digitization capacities and timelines. To give some examples from that, when we began the project, only 1 item from USC and 1 item from your OSU had been digitized. And then in fact, that item ended up having to be re-digitized at a higher quality. So a necessary first step was just getting everything digitized, which sounds simple, but it was a different process at each school. And not all of our schools were creating IIIF compliant digitized content when we started, but we identified that that was a really important feature for us. So there was a lot of time lag and discussions while we waited for IIIF compatibility to come on board, or like the previously digitized materials at USC to become IIIF compliant, a lot of conversations with digital library colleagues. Also, as institutions with small to mid-sized collections of Japanese materials, like I said, and we're all working at schools that are centralized, by which I mean like our Japanese collections are not in standalone East Asian libraries that have operations conducted in-house. So our digital library colleagues have not had a lot of opportunities to work with East Asian materials. So getting the materials digitized requires additional conversations and consultations and investment of resources. So like at USC, I specifically requested the Jipinchi Iku, the Shanks Mare, that it be, there'd be 1 image that captured like the single image showing the accordion format, and then that there's like that there would be single page spreads, but then there's fold outs. So then I wanted 2-page spreads for those and so on. And then post digitization, Jessie had to look really carefully through the sequential order of pages in the final product, as the digital library colleagues said that they were unsure that they had the order of pages correct, because the accordion book in this case is double-sided and no pagination that they could understand was present. At OSU, just recently the Sugoroku were digitized, and then the reformatting team uploaded one of them upside down, because again, they're unfamiliar with the format and the positioning of Japanese characters, right? And then I would like to show you a video. Nope, where am I? From OSU that they created that also shows just some of the challenges again. In this case for them, this is videos about digitizing the manga scrolls. And I'll just play like a 2-minute section of it.
Complicated digitization projects are always my favorite because they require us to problem solve and try imaging setups that we haven't attempted before. And this was one of those projects. The scrolls couldn't be photographed on our usual photography table, which is only 3.5 feet across. The space around the table in the photography room is also small. So trying to manage the scroll in 3.5-foot sections with the rest of it hanging off at the sides would have been dangerous for the material and just impossible in the given space that we had. Luckily, the head of collections care agreed to make the collections care department available to us for a few days.
Initially we talked about getting, these renting rigs, and it got pretty big, and we realized that a lot of it either was impractical or too expensive. So we kind of went with the more homemade options.
We were kind of debating whether we should keep the scroll stationary and move the camera overhead, or whether we keep the camera stationary and move the scroll below it. And there were a couple considerations that went into the decision, but ultimately it made more sense to do the platform. It just was a little more easy to do in-house. We had this 4x8 sheet of plywood. I did some researching online with some other people in the cultural heritage imaging community, and I kind of pieced together what they kind of did in similar situations. So I bought some V-shaped casters on Amazon, kind of like what you would have for like an overhead, like a barn style door. And then those sat on top of just some angle iron that we got at Home Depot. And we just taped those on the ground in parallel. So like create a little railroad track basically that it could slide back and forth on. And then once we had it squared to the platform and that was aligned to the camera, just basically just sliding the platform, the scroll really didn't move very much inside of our imaging frame.
They wanted me on hand because of the size and having.
Pause the video there, but there's actually 2 great videos on the Ohio State University library website if you want to see the full videos. So we're now at the stage where we have everything digitized and IIIF compliant, and we've been brainstorming, what we want the website to look like. So Jessie's been creating mock-ups that we can use to take specific requests to the Scalar developers to help bring our ideas to life. So for example, we have 2 versions of maps that sort of give this great visual overview of the concept of alternative views. So in blue are the locations of the main 53 stations. The locations in red and orange highlight the incorporation of other popular travel places like in Kamakura and the Ise areas, which were incorporated or could be incorporated as side trips from the Tōkaidō route. So the ones in orange are from the Tōkaidō Fuke no Zoo, and the ones in red are from Tōkaidō to Hizakurige. And then beyond the geographical distinction that's represented, in these versions that are expanding beyond the 53 stations, we also have this kind of like fictional guidebook idea, right? With Jipencha Iku's Shengsme, it's representing an alternative artist who brought their own unique interpretation to depicting the famous travel highway. And then we've also got other alternative artists represented in the project, like cartoonists and comic artists like the Tokyo Manga Association. But back to the maps, we currently have 2 versions. So in one version, we're just trying to figure out what's best. We just have kind of, oh, that one's not working. We just have like links that you could then go to see how each item depicted that place. And in the other version of the map that we're playing around with, in this one, we have it set up that you would see thumbnails of each item and how it represented that station. And like I said, these are just HTML prototypes. They're too big for us to upload to Scalar right now, so we have to like decide which version we want and then work with the Scalar team for the coding to get them actually in use. We're also thinking about the idea of alternative views through the image slider test that we're playing around with. So here, I mentioned earlier, there's 2 different manga scrolls at OSU. So in this example, we've got the representation of Nihonbashi, and you can see how using the image slider, it's quite different across the 2 scrolls. So one gives a wider viewpoint, while this one is giving a close-up of the dragon and the lamppost, that's visible on the first image, but it's obviously not the main focal point as it is here. And this is just comparing the 2 manga scrolls at OSU. Obviously, you know, we could do this for like each item's representation of Nihonbashi and then expand that across all the stations. And we're also toying with images with annotations, the slider with images on top of each other. You can see here like the images with annotations, for example, that we're playing around with. So the potential future directions. So we're obviously still messing around with how the site will look visually and the options people will have for exploring the content. We're also thinking a lot about our audience and the purpose of the site. So currently we're thinking about opportunities for collaborations with other libraries to compare their materials or bring in materials with what's already included in the project. But obviously something like this can expand infinitely, and we want to, you know, kind of like what Paula was saying earlier, we need to have some boundaries around what we're trying to do, at least initially. We're also quite excited about the possibility of incorporating models for K-12 or your primary school education and partnering with the US-based National Consortium for Teaching About Asia to have educators and pedagogy experts for primary school education to create lesson plans and integrate teaching materials like what this website could be into their classrooms. And through the Ohio State University East Asian Studies Center, Anne-Marie already has experience working on such partnerships. We're also considering adding a crowdsourcing feature to transliterate and translate the poetry and other text on some of the images, or potentially partnering with one of the Kuzushiji training workshops that happen in Europe and North America to maybe have a workshop focused on these materials that grad students could work on. And then, you know, we might also reach out to additional specialists, particularly art historians, which we don't have among our group, to solicit essays or analysis to incorporate expert perspectives that could be useful for teaching or research. And then just one thing I want to emphasize in closing is that while the conversations and interventions like I described we've had with digital library colleagues, for example, have taken quite a bit of time, and we've had to follow, you know, their schedules for digitization and reformatting and copyright consultations across 3 different institutions. This type of project is really constructive in helping our colleagues grow and develop new innovations and solutions that in turn create more opportunities for the digitization of other challenging materials. So it's really creating new and unexpected opportunities at our institutions. There's also serendipitous discoveries and ensuing purchases that support our collection development goals. So Anne-Marie discovered a second, slightly different set of manga scrolls through working on this project. I acquired the Jippensha Ikku item for USC after I saw it in a dealer's catalog. And it, you know, serves a purpose for this project. It also provides an interesting example of copper printing in Japan to sit alongside woodblock printed texts that can be used for the history of book, history of print technology classes. For Matthew, the project has represented an opportunity to become better acquainted with the Japanese Red Book holdings at Duke, and with the digitization processes, because he was relatively new to his position when he started out working with us in this. And for Jesse, it's an opportunity to test out and learn additional digital humanities skills, which is an area where he has significant expertise. So thank you all for listening, and I'm happy to take questions now, or should I take them during the break? During the break's fine. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much for taking us on this trip through the Tōkaidō. At the end, we had to run a bit, but thank you very much. Very interesting project. So questions we keep for the break, and I would like to move on to the last presentation of the